Tánaiste, Mark Paul in the Irish Times yesterday broke the story that a company called MML Holdings, which owns O'Flaherty Holdings, received €1.8 million in taxpayer-funded wage subsidies in 2020. It made profits of nearly €10 million last year. Now here's the rub. It also paid out a dividend of almost exactly the same amount of money to Hailstone Holdings, an offshore company in the Isle of Man tax haven. Now this is some coincidence. Now, these related companies ultimately flogged Mercedes cars to well-heeled people across the country. And the O'Flaherty family made a tidy profit last year, while the people of Ireland picked up the bill for the wages of their workers, a bill paid for with the borrowings that future generations will have to pay. Now, this would make Boise, the car dealer from Only Fools and Horses, blush, quite frankly. And we know again from the Irish Times that Prometric and their related companies were at it too. Now, this is a company that the state uses to operate our driver theory tests. It paid out €1.25 million in dividends last year, after getting in total probably around €1.5 million to date in wage subsidies. Now, I hope you agree that this is absolutely extraordinary. Tánaiste, the wage subsidy schemes which this House has supported have saved jobs and they have kept good businesses going. Now, surely the scheme was never meant to line the pockets of big investors. Now, even Santa Claus wouldn't be this generous. Now, I can guarantee, Tánaiste, that this story does not end here. Now, the government is big on corporate welfare, but it's not big on corporate obligations. The truth is the government was warned that this abuse would happen. From the get-go, I have argued, and the Labour Party has argued, for strict social, economic and labour conditions to be attached to the schemes. And we've said in this House that there should be no supports for companies registered in tax havens, no subsidies for companies with enough cash to pay dividends, and no payment to companies who ignore recommendations from the WRC or from the Labour Court. Now, other countries attach conditionality to ensure that state aid could not go to companies registered in tax havens. France and Austria included dividend bans, but no such strings were attached here. All we currently have are revenue compliance checks. Now, I think it's clear that companies that are and were profitable should be looking at whether they really need that support from the state, and the Minister for Finance seems to agree with me. Now, we have called repeatedly, Tánaiste, for the EWSS to be transformed into a permanent short-time working scheme with conditions. We know that these schemes operate well to save jobs when the economy is in difficulty. So, Tánaiste, I want to ask you this. Will you call on O'Flaherty Holdings and Prometric to repay the pandemic supports that they obviously didn't need? And will the government now carry out a full audit of the payments made to companies to find out if other companies profited from the wage subsidy schemes in this way? And because we are at risk of losing tens of thousands of jobs next year, will the government now put in place a permanent revised short-term working scheme with conditions, as I've consistently advised?
Ged Nash, can I caution, we need to be careful in making allegations certainly against named families, even though they may be beneficial owners of companies and so on, or corporations, but we just need to tread warily, please. Tánaiste.
Thanks, Deputy, and cognizant of what the Ceann Comhairle has said, I'm not going to make any particular remark about any particular company or any particular individual, but what I can say in the round is it's my view that companies that have recorded substantial profits this year or are in the position to pay substantial dividends should refund the money they received under the Employment Wage Subsidy Scheme. A number of companies have. They received the money in good faith. They didn't know how much they would be hit by the pandemic. The Employment Wage Subsidy Scheme enabled them to keep on staff that they might otherwise have left off or let go or put on short time. But if it turned out that the year turned out to be a good year for a company, that they made substantial profits, that they could pay their shareholders dividends, that they didn't really need the wage subsidy money, well then I think that money should be repaid, and that's the view of government as well. Both the wage subsidy scheme and the pandemic unemployment payment were organised and designed in a hurry. We needed to get money out to workers and money out to businesses quickly, and we always knew that some people wouldn't necessarily need the money, and that applied to both schemes. But I think particularly when it comes to the wage subsidy scheme, where substantial profits are made by companies or they find themselves in a position to pay dividends, that it's appropriate that they should return that cash to the taxpayer. And I know some companies have done that, in fairness. Others have not, and I think they should.
Ged Nash.
I absolutely agree, but the truth is the kind of behaviour that I outlined from corporate entities, and it's on the record, this has happened, and I believe that there will be possibly more revelations over the next few days, show that this kind of behaviour should have been made unlawful in the first case, as has been the case in Austria and some other countries against which we like to compare ourselves. And the truth is that no conditionality whatsoever was attached to the TWSS, and I can understand that the TWSS in particular was brought in a rush. It was an urgent scheme, and it was a good scheme to keep people close to their employers and keep people in work. But the lesson should have been applied to the operation of the EWSS. And can I ask the Taoiseach, in conclusion, if he will discuss with the Revenue Commissioners the need to properly audit companies who have benefited from the scheme. It is unfortunate that all we can do in this House, because this kind of behaviour is not unlawful, all we can do is plead with profitable companies to return this money to the taxpayer. That's not acceptable to me, and we should learn lessons from the way in which this scheme has operated. And in conclusion, Taoiseach, can I wish you, Matt, and your family a very happy Christmas, and I hope you get to enjoy a break.
Thank you, Deputy Nash.
Thanks, Deputy. In the case of the employment wage subsidy, over 6.6 billion has been provided, comprising direct subsidy payments of 5.729 billion to companies and PRSI foregone of just under $1 billion. It's helped to protect about 700,000 jobs in 60,000 companies. The legislation incorporates important safeguards to ensure that it's correctly claimed by companies, and Revenue is and will be undertaking assurance checks in relation to the scheme to ensure the conditions have been met. In the case of EWIS, qualification is based on the employer demonstrating that his or her business experienced a 30% reduction in turnover orders during a specific reference period, and that was caused as a consequence of disruption related to the pandemic. Revenue is rigorous in its structured programme of checks to ensure that the eligibility of businesses for subsidy payments under the scheme, and will pursue any instances where a business fails to qualify for the scheme, whatever the reason. While the question of what dividends a company may or may not be in a position to pay shareholders is a matter outside the current legislative remit of the scheme, the Minister of Finance once noted that some companies have voluntarily repaid some or all of the subsidy received, and the Revenue has put in place procedures for the repayment of wage subsidies where businesses wish to make them.
Thank you, Taoiseach.